the circumstances behind the commission that brought your talent to St. James United Church?
Yes, it happened really by accident, because we had a very small exhibition in Ottawa, just local artists, and I was just a year and a half out of art school, and so I had displayed some of the low relief carvings that I was working on at the time. And I think that Mr. Joyce must have come to the show, because I lived across the river in the woods with my parents' house in the country. And a phone call came through, he asking me to come to the church here in town because he wanted to discuss having me make some carvings for the new altar, and the new room and the altar and everything. At the podium, place where the lessons are read.
Yes, the reading desk and the pulpit.
Yeah. And so I came, and we both liked each other, and that's important. And relaxed immediately, and he said what he wanted was to have some aspect of God and Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and that's just about all he told me. So the result is I decided, well, I'm going to show God the Father creating the world, and then including Jesus, because he is God the Son, and they are one. So I thought it's a good idea to make them one in this case, in the bronzes. And so there they are, working together, producing the creation and also the cosmos, and then ending in relaxation at the end. And for the lectern, and there's another stand as well.
In the pulpit.
Pulpit, thank you. I don't know why I can't remember. Thank you, I thought, well, it's very important to try to explain that there was one of the gospel writers, John, who went to the very, very core of things when he said about the Word. And the Word became, and he just went on. I don't want to repeat what he said, but it's so beautiful, it's better just to read it. So I have him with a paddle in his hand, although you don't see him very well because it's all abstract realism. It's not intended to be realistic, because I feel that what I believe, and I expect that you also, we all believe along the same lines. Just as the taxi driver who was a Muslim was driving me day before yesterday for a hospital checkup, and he said, all of a sudden he said, there's only one God. There are different rules, but there's only one God. And I said, yes, you're right. It was fantastic. And that's all he said. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I think too. So I want to just give the essence of and make it more spiritual than real. And that, so that and then when we get to the wood panels, I'll be able to explain it a little bit better. But that was my intent, to try to stay away from realism and to somehow make people feel at ease with the idea that God is there, but he's not glaring at us. I don't know how else to say.
Can we?
Did Reverend Joyce suggest the materials that you use for these plaques, or was that your suggestion?
I don't remember him making any suggestion of that sort, but I told him that I was doing some experiments in bronze, and that I would be using that technique. And I think what we both decided was that if it didn't work, I'd do something else, because I could give them a different presentation.
Okay.
And as it turned out, we both liked the result, and they're right here now.
Yes. Well,
all these years later.
Yes, they've seen quite a bit of movement and history in that time, but people cherish them very much.
Oh, good. That's good. Because I loved them, and of course, when I made them, because I was cutting straight into the sand, but we'll explain that later on. It became a very intimate work for me, just as when you carve into stone or wood, you're cutting into something Yeah, well, it's like cooking. I don't know if you work on the outside in the summertime, cooking the meat and things on the fire, but there's a unity that arrives somehow if you work with the material instead of just sitting down to a plate and eating it.
Okay.
I don't know if you've had that experience
Well,
or
that's,
not.
yes.
But that's as close as I can get to what it's like when you're carving and trying to figure out how to get this bit out without wrecking that bit, you know.
Exactly. So, what do you remember most fondly about the commission? What did you have some good memories about it you'd like to share?
Oh yes, it was really great because Mr. Joyce was the sort of man who never intruded. He said what he wanted, and if I listened, I would get it clearly in my head what he did want, and I'm used to listening because I was always told to listen, or pay attention. So I just went ahead and I was working at home rather than in the foundry. I took the raw material home after casting and pounded it with a hammer, a peening hammer, and sometimes it had to smooth off rough bits. But and then I put it in the earth for about a month so that it green up, because the animals in the earth like to eat copper.
Okay, so that's how it gets the oxidization. Right?
That's partly how it's done. Of course, it has to be damp too.
Okay.
And rust sets in, which is good too, as long as you don't allow. I mean, not iron rust, but a different kind.
Yeah.
It's called bronze disease.
Bronze. Okay.
You don't want too much of it. Oh yeah, it's incredible. It's just left over the years. When you go to clean up the bronzes, which we did on Parliament Hill twice now. You look inside the figures, and the metal is like stalactites hanging down, and it's these creatures that it's a form of cancer of the metal.
Were you a consultant for the restoration of the bronzes on Parliament Hill?
Yes, they used me for a lot of things, including plumbing once and lighting up in the House of Commons, way up at the top there. They had some lights that weren't working properly. They didn't like the way they lit up the ceiling. And I come from a family of engineers, and of course there wasn't any time for me to talk, so I had to listen. And I learned that white light is, first of all, cool, won't start a fire, and secondly, it has a wider spectrum. And so I suggested they use it, and it's still there all these years later.
Very good.
So they found me useful.
Pardon my cough.
I have some water.
No, it's fine. What gave you the most problems with the commission? Was there anything special that was difficult about the bronzes or the wooden plaques?
No, unfortunately, I don't have problems.
Well,
because, no, it's true, I have lots of problems, but not when I'm working.
Yeah, okay.
And I think it's because I had such excellent training that, and also at home, we were taught to think ahead. My father was a naval architect, that is a designer of ships and an engineer therefore. And Mother had to plan ahead because we moved, not often enough. She had to find schools for us and everything. So we just learned how to think ahead. So I thought, now let's see. Mr. Joyce wants bronze, and I better get in touch with Bill and find out when I can work in the foundry, because of course I was going to work directly, and therefore it could have been in the way.
Was the foundry in the Ottawa area?
Yes, it's here in Ottawa, Bond Brass Limited.
Okay.
And his father had established it, and it was on MacArthur Road where the big shopping centre is now.
Okay.
But the land was rented. It was a big foundry, very successful. He made, his father before him, and he made equipment such as these stands, like that, all sand cast things, rather than the art cast, which is, they use wax. And the disadvantage to wax is that there is a shrinkage, a certain shrinkage.
Okay.
When the heat strikes the interior of the mold, which is made of wax, the wax being a semi-living material, tends to shrink up a little bit like this.
Right.
So you could lose as much as 3 or 4 inches on a bench 12 feet long, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot.
Well, that is.
Whereas with the sand, it's absolutely dead on accurate. If you make a mistake, it's there. But if you don't make a mistake, for example, you're making equipment for medical machinery,
Yes.
it has to be so accurate that it's
The
within
tolerances have to be perfect.
absolutely perfect. That's what he used to do. He would produce these
Okay.
this equipment for the those people, the council, the science people.
Oh, the National Research
National
Council.
Research, yes.
National Research Council.
Yeah.
Okay.
The reason why I keep forgetting the title of those people is that my youngest nephew used to say, "I'm going to see the Searching Council." So that's all I can remember.
National Research Council.
Yes. And anyway, so that what you see here in the bronzes is exactly the way it was in the negative before I took it out of the sand and started working on it.
Wonderful.
Which is great. Yeah.
So you must have been very pleased when you saw it come out
Well,
of
I
the
was a little
sand.
bit shocked because I didn't expect it to be so powerful.
Oh, okay.
And I thought,
That
gosh,
shocked in a very good way.
yes, and I thought, oh my goodness, I hope that, this is a large group of people, not just Mr. Joyce. I hope that I won't offend some of them, because some of it is pretty raw
Mm-hmm.
power. But I think it's important, because that's, if there is an energy, because as we know it's not a person like us, but if there is an energy that created all the energy that we see now, and every year we know more about it, it's amazing what we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And Saturday, Stephen Hawking is going to be on a special program on Saturday on television. This intellect or power has to be beyond anybody's understanding. And so I wanted to get that feel
Get
into
that
these
power.
instead of just, oh, Jesus is so kind and he'll take care of you when you're sick. And God the Father will point and say, wake up, you're alive. I want something deeper than that.
Yes.
And I think I got it. We'll see.
Were you present when the new sanctuary was dedicated and
No, I was living in England.
You were in England at
Yeah.
that time, so you didn't watch the initial reaction to your work then when people came into the
I think,
sanctuary.
let's see now, was I just before I went? I know I have before, I've been searching for it and I can't find it. I know I have a little book, little folder describing, yes, so I was there. But then I went to England a day or two later.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it was very pleasant because it was warm and friendly. My memory of it is,
Yes.
it was quiet. The work was offered to the
Mhm.
people. Nobody said they didn't want it, and that was it.
And that was it? Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure it was very dramatically presented at that time. It was there attached to the pulpit and a centerpiece of,
Yes, they were
of a
all.
really beautiful room.
Oh yes, yes. I was sad when they took them apart because, of course, once you do that, you've lost the meaning of the work.
Mm-hmm.
It's like taking things out of off site and putting them into a museum. And then you have to put a little plaque up saying, well, this came from so-and-so's palace, like Topkapi, for instance,
Yes.
the women's harem
In Istanbul.
thank you, in Istanbul. It's the life, in a way, part of the life is gone.
Okay.
Because it's not part of the rhythm of the whole building.
Right, and it's not in the same situation it was conceived for.
That's right. Yeah, it's pulled out. It's a bit like the taking of the children. They did it because they thought it was a good idea. But they took the children from the people in the north, brought them down here to teach them the southern language so that they would survive when the time came.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't realize what they had done. It was ripped them right out of their nests and caused them great damage. And then there were some damaged people taking care of them who caused them even more damage.
Mm-hmm.
Though I think it's sad that we keep stressing that side and leave out the other side, because the other side is enormous.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
Yeah, there are always two sides to
Yes,
most
but
of
the
these
other
debates.
is more colorful, people want to be excited and stuff. It's sad, but that's the way it is.
Perhaps we can go and now and look at some of the plaques, and
Yes.
and you can talk about those with
Yes,
Michael.
sure. Yeah, there are 4 wooden ones made in black walnut. Darn, I intended bringing the tools and I forgot.
Well,
That's
well,
all
you
right.
can describe them
That's
for
all
us.
right. Well, they're just like wide blades.
Uh-huh.
And then the other 4 are in bronze.
When you're carving them in the wood, do you just use pressure, or did you use any
Use a
little
mallet.
hammers?
I
You
use a mallet.
You use a mallet,
Yeah.
okay.
Quite a big mallet.
With a sort of rubber head to it, or?
No, because the rubber, it would bounce off. It wouldn't, black walnut is hard. It's very hard wood. It's not as hard as some, but it's hard.
Yes.
And therefore you get lovely crisp edges, and you can go quite deep without destroying the strength of the panel.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can go into much greater detail, perhaps, than, I mean, just with the knives.
Yes.
Than you could if you were making a model bird in balsa wood. Then you'd use little files and things.
Yes.
You get a lot of detail, but there's a different feel to it.
Okay. Well, let's go over to the plaques
Okay.
now and
Yes.
look at them directly.
There's his shoulder, neck, shoulder. Here's his hand on the paddle that he's going to use to go through up the stream of life that God is giving him to give us. And then here's his other hand receiving the word from God. This is his clothing. There's his knee and his foot. Would you like me to do it that way?
Sure.
That's
And
good,
then
yeah.
the last one, I don't know what it is. I think it's probably just a decoration.
But
Because
that
it-
third one was John, you said, eh?
This is John, this is the Holy Spirit, and I'll show you. I think that's the thing to do. You just have me here, like this, and moving along.
Okay, well, let me,
So here's Jesus, the Cairo, the thing that the Christians use, the sign the Christians use so that they wouldn't be murdered instantly. And Jesus pulled the fish from the lake and fed everyone. In other words, I'm pushing all the stories in together so that it's all symbolic.
Right.
I'm not trying to copy what he said, but what I'm trying to do is tell what he did, which was to do these extraordinary things, such as telling his friends, the fishermen, put the nets over the side, and they said, well, why would we do that? What's the point? We haven't got anything all night. Well, do it anyway, he said, and their nets were so loaded down they couldn't pull them up. They had to go back to shore with them. So, and people I know, I'm sure, know all of this.
Well, and the fish was a symbol that Christians used as well.
That's true, because it gave the name in Greek of Jesus Christ, Son of God, just the initials. The name of the fish happened to spell out the name. So I thought, well, what I would do is show that. And then the fire of his love is coming up here to his death on the cross here. His offering, in other words. This is the Holy Spirit continuing teaching us the word, the faith. After Christ is gone, because he says, I have to leave in order to allow the Spirit to come, Holy Spirit to come. So here he is, as a bird, head, beak, eye, breast, tail, wings, and a sort of fire, and that's the fiery, the wings become fire. So he came down as tons of forms of fire into the room. Apparently it wasn't the first time that happened. And then the third one is John, the evangelist, who I've just described to you, so we don't need to go over it all again. But the idea is that he then wrote down he wasn't the only one, but he wrote down what he heard and what he had been taught. And the last one I think must be, I'm not sure, but because in my work, I always include nature. And I think what I did was I just put this there to say we also have the cosmos to consider.
Symbolizes creation.
Yeah, I think that must be what I meant. Because I've always been, and of course as I grew older, I began to study, trying to understand what they're finding out, you know, about motion and time and that kind of thing. Because it's all part of creation. Yeah, that's what that is.
So did you essentially get started on paper first?
No, I never
Eleanor?
draw on paper.
You didn't draw on paper?
I never do.
You worked directly on
I
the
always,
wood?
yeah, it seems to come out of here. So I can see it. If before I start, I can see it.
Right.
Do you sketch it out on the panels?
Well, yeah, oh yes, I'll draw the form so that the knife will follow, because once you start using your knife, you're confined to a tiny space. As you, I want to carve the edge of this hand and then the cuff and down here. Well, I could only do it at one little cut at a time.
Right.
And very slowly the form I'm after would begin to show. I mean, you'd begin to see it. But so that was why I needed to draw the image to follow. It's like following a pattern.
Okay.
You're making a boat. You make a drawing of the hull and the oars and all the rest. And then you make cutouts, put it on. This case I didn't have to make cutouts, but you make templates and you put it on the wood and you make same thing.
You mentioned you chose walnut for this.
Yes.
Are there other choices, or is this the choice
There are
generally
wonderful
for
choices.
relief?
There are wonderful choices in wood, but it happened that, as I said earlier, my father was a ship designer, and he and his firm designed all the furniture that would go into the boats, like ferry boat. They were all working boats, no liners or anything like that. And so in the ferry boats, etc. So they would get wood that would be metal that would be rust-proof and wood that wouldn't rot from dampness. And black walnut can take almost anything in the way of dampness. So it happened that his cabinet maker had lots of black walnut in stock, and so I said to Dad, I need some walnut, please. And he'd say, what size? So I'd tell him, and then he'd phone Mr. Ralphs and Frank Ralphs, and he'd cut it up, prepare it for me, and there it would be, effortlessly. So your walnut comes from a stack of black walnut that was used for boats in Canada.
Well, perhaps, maybe
This very first panel, I'm sorry.
by introduction, these are the 4 panels, right, that were
These
mounted
are
on the communion table?
Yes.
At St. James
Yes,
at one time.
yeah, they were ordered for the
These
new.
are the first 2?
Yes, those are the first 2. They're in the right sequence.
Right. And so, is there a continuity in
Yes.
the story here?
Yes, this is the
Love to
beginning
hear
of God imposing His strength on the void. And so, and I'll explain that in a second. And the second one is the creation of light out of darkness. And the third one, which is on the other side, finish that
Sure.
story and end. But Christ is included in that I've tried to use some symbols of Christ because He came into earth, live here with us. And so somehow He made us realize that God was more than just a distant figure somewhere off there. He said, Abba, Father, call Him Father. And so he taught us to be much closer to this great power that exists, of course, I think still exists, and which we will never understand. But it doesn't matter as long as we know that it's there, and we're not wondering, I don't know, let's leave that to another day. Here's the figure of God. And you can see the bearded face, heavy beard, heavy brow of an older man, and the power to create is represented by these 3 flat arrows, and also his stance, the knees apart, and nothing would knock him down except something that would knock him out, and you can't knock God out, so nothing would knock him down. And he takes his power, though, he sends it out, but he brings it back to himself. so that we can't take control of it. It's something that, a gift he gives us. And then the second panel shows him sitting down and he's saying to the darkness, which is symbolized by the moon, let there be light. And here, up here, you'll see a ring with fire coming out of it, and his hand open this way. Let there be light. And so light began. And his face is closer to what we see as the Christ face. And the reason why I did that was to introduce the fact that the Christ is also the person of God. And I think it's important to see that. So, and these are cast in bronze, carved in reverse, in the negative, in sand. And that's why you see this very lovely, delightful, rough quality that you wouldn't get if you used clay. And then this I polished using, it was rough like this when it came out of the mold. And I polished it with polishing wheels. And colored it by burying it in the earth up in the country for about a month and a half. And then, of course, over the years, it continued to green up without being badly damaged. Right. So that's all, I think. Unless we'd like to ask me some questions.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering, the process that you were just describing, is that something like woodcuts?
Yes,
in
very
that
much like,
kind of...
exactly, very much like woodcuts. Because you cut out the background, as you were just saying, and leave the drawing high up. Some, you can do it in reverse, of course, and leave the background, and then take the graver and engrave the lines so that the drawing is white lines with a black background or color. Yes, and in this case it's background cut away and the foreground. But in this case, what I had to do was see it in the negative. Mm-hmm. So in the casting, this part was high here, right, and this was low. It was very interesting.
So you're cutting this into sand.
Into very hard, what they call French sand,
French.
Which is a mix. And it's so many years since I worked in it, I can't remember the mix, but I think they had molasses as well as sand mixed it together. But it was a green color. And when you pounded it into the mold, the flask, which would be shaped like a book with the sides, 4 sides, but no front and no back. Right. So you just have it on a work table and pound the sand in. And then cut the design into the sand, and then have the other half of the mold just perfectly plain, no carving or anything. And then you pour, the gate is somewhere around here. You pour the metal in, say up here, right, into the mold, and then you get this.
Right.
So it's hard to describe in words.
The sand is a little bit harder than say a nice wet sand you build castles from at the seaside.
It does crumble.
It does crumble.
Yeah, but it's a different. It's green in color, and I think there might be other colors, but the green sand was the one we used in this foundry here at Ottawa. Right. And I'm pretty sure, if my memory is correct, there was a little bit of molasses mixed in. And that's what would give it the consistency to hold the form when you cut into it. Right. And of course it was wet, yes. Dampened. Yes, damp. So if you didn't work quickly and it dried up, you'd lose the edges, for instance, because they'd just crumble off. Right. As you moved it and put the forms together, they'd fall off. So you have to work quickly.
Right. I wonder if maybe we should move over to the other side and continue the story of the 4 plaques there, so that we can get the complete item 3 and 4, right? Yes. Panels 3 and 4, and so the story continues.
And the story is that after God created creation, He also intended that someone should come to earth and teach, and let us know about Him. And so He told the Son, second person of the Trinity, to come to earth as a human being. Here's His hand holding the symbol of the cross, and then coming, and here's his clothing, his leg and the other leg in a basin, which was he's stepping out of the river after his baptism. In other words, he claimed that he was the Son of God, and that's how he did it, by asking John to baptize him. He didn't need to be baptized, but it was a good way to. And then he also, Christ also brought us the image and the knowledge that there is the Lamb of God. He said, I am the Lamb of God, meaning that he was more than just himself. He was going to offer himself as an immolation for our sake. So this is really all symbolic of the life of Christ and what he intended doing. And the last one is, he says also, again it's Christ. First two are God the Father, second two are Jesus. And this one, this is hard to see. This is the Omega sign, the end. Mm-hmm. But you can't see it because it's got all green. He has that in his hand. He says, I am the Alpha, the beginning, and the end. And this represents his teaching. Instead of his offering here, this is his teaching. I am the beginning and the end. Listen and you will learn. So it's really just a quiet scene of him sitting quietly teaching. And there's his head up there. And the hand holding the Alpha. So,
that's a marvelous story. It really makes the bronzes come alive,
I'm
right?
so glad.
When you begin to understand what it is you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm so glad, because I felt maybe because they'd been separated, the unity in the design and the intention would be lost, but it's not, because you've got them up on the wall where it was very easy for me to just go around and we all, not just me, pulled them together visually as the story was told.
Yes, very good. Yeah. I just want to come back to the process again for actually creating these bronze castings. As we were speaking a moment ago, they're cast. You cut them into sand.
Yes, I used a very sharp knife.
Fairly sharp, solid sand. You said.
Very, very hard sand. Yeah.
Of sand.
If you leaned on it, it wouldn't take your fingerprints.
Right. Oh, that's
But if
very
you
hard.
wanted to make it take your fingerprints, you could. But if you just leaned gently on it, it wouldn't.
Right.
Whereas ordinary wet sand on the beach, as we know, would.
Would, yes. Right. So did you have a time limit in terms of once you got the sand service and started carving, did you have a time limit as to how long you could take to do your carving before the sand would start to dry out?
Yes. Well, of course, I wouldn't know exactly how soon the sand would start to dry out, but I knew that once it did begin to dry, it would lose its crisp quality, and we wouldn't get these delicate lines, because these lines they're not just a straight line cut in the sand, they're really drawings with a knife. So you're putting pressure, the inward curve causes sand to be pushed back a bit. If it gets too dry, it will just crumble off.
Right.
Whereas here you can see a little bit here where I did push it back, so that I could get a slight little plane here to catch the light from here, and this being the deeper dark. But yes, it took about 2 hours for each one of these, working though without stopping, and working with really concentration. So you're over the work like this.
Similar to I'm just thinking back to the wood panels where you said you laid out your major lines on the wood panels so that to guide you when you're cutting. How would you do that on a sand surface?
So this I did from my hand.
So this is
Yes, you see, when you're cutting with a knife, you're doing tiny little bits. You might be able to do quite a bit. If you rock the knife, you can do a longer line, but generally speaking, it's a short stab and cut this way, and then that way to take out the material. This way, and then the knife that way to cut out the material. But with the sand, it's a yielding material even when it's wet. In fact, we like working with pie crust, wet before you bake it, something like that. And in fact, you see people carving it, well, that sort of thing. But I'd have to do it quickly and know what I wanted. And And if I made a mistake, I'd have to start all over again.
Okay.
But I was fortunate I didn't make a mistake.
So all four of them went?
They were, yes, they went according to the schedule. Because of course, as I said, I could be in the way in the foundry. Because I was doing this artwork and they were making their living. And Bill Bond wanted me there, and Art Price. He and Art Price, who was a sculptor here in Ottawa for a long time. He moved to Toronto. He wanted us because we were artists, and he wanted to put us in his brochure as also a foundry capable of producing artwork. So and therefore I got my bronze for $13 a pound instead of $125 a pound. Things like that. But I had to do everything myself, you know,
Right.
except pour the metal.
Well, a fascinating story.
Yes, and also the church gained because I got it so cheaply.
Oh, you did well.
I was
too.
able to sell it for nothing practically, in comparison to if I'd had to charge what it was charged me. And now I've forgotten what it is, $700 a pound, I think.
Okay.
I was just wondering, Eleanor, most of your work has been with stone, I understand, you know, in the Parliament buildings and everything. How many bronzes have you done? I mean, this would seem to be not the usual medium that you worked in over the course of your career.
Made quite a few.
Uh-huh.
What I did was, this was before I was working for the government.
Yes.
And so I got this commission. It was because people had seen the work at that small exhibition in Ottawa.
Yes.
So the people who commissioned me were people who lived in either on the other side of the river or here. There were one in Toronto.
Right.
I don't know exactly how many, but at the same time as I was making bronzes, I was also making full round figures in wood. And it wasn't until I started working for the government that I had to concentrate on stone, because that was my job.
Yes.
And the weekends I used to go do gardening or paint or something. Or go to the country and get outside and do nothing, which was nice.
When you were a Dominion sculptor, we associate most of your work as being in stone, carving inside the center block of the House of Commons. But you did many other things while you held that position. Can you tell us some of those things?
Yes, I can. And just to make a point, every time I was asked to, for instance, design stained glass windows for the House of Commons, or make some furniture to put on the desks of the members of House of Commons. No, I can tell you why I did that later. Or did restoration work. The men got a raise. Because, I don't know how it is nowadays, but the job description was that one was hired and you did that particular thing, which is stone cutting, which is what the men were doing. And when they learned how to be stone carvers, they got a raise. And then when they learned how to do gold leaf work and man picture frames, that was a different technique, so they got another raise. And so they were very happy with good reason. But nowadays, I don't think it works that way.
But you did all of these crafts, or these
Yes, during my
these
training
work.
over the years. I trained in Canada, in England, and in the United States, and so I trained in different fields because I was interested.
And you trained the people who worked in the House of Commons and to do these things.
I did because I needed their assistance.
Okay.
These were huge picture frames that weighed 150 pounds. Don't know how that you'd be in the new measurements, weights I mean. But so we would take them down with pictures that are in the hallways in the center block. And the cleaning staff, of course, when they would clean these very ornate picture frames, would sometimes damage them. And so we needed to the men made replicas of what had been there, copying other parts of the pattern, which was repeated throughout the frame, so it wasn't impossible to do. And then I taught them how to lay the gold leaf, which was a nice job. It's a very nice job. And then we would put them up, and if people liked them, fine. If they didn't like them, we'd take them down and do it again.
Okay, always aiming to please.
Yeah, that's right, it didn't bother us. And nobody bothered us either, they didn't say, no, that won't do. And also the, what else? Some work outside, men made stone walls, needed repairing, they repaired those. Eventually that became a separate group of stonemasons, but for a long time we did that and other things.
Well, thank you very much for telling us all about this today. Eleanor, Milne, we really appreciate your coming to Glebe-St. James today and letting us know about all of these things.
Oh, thanks. I mean, gosh, this is a wonderful church, isn't it? And the people. I don't know many of them, but the ones I met last time we were here, you had quite a few of them here, I just felt so welcome. And Barbara said the same thing. That's my sister, Barbara. She said she felt she could just walk around anywhere in here. And being an architect, she wanted to.
Yes.
And she said she felt very much at home. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eleanor. This is an interview with Eleanor Milne on June the 11th, 2010 in the sanctuary at Glebe-St. James United Church in Ottawa. Thank you, Milne. Thank you again, Eleanor.
My pleasure.